Hello, everyone. See you all rolling in, whether it's 9 a.m. on the West Coast, 12 p.m. on the East Coast, somewhere in the middle. Good morning, good afternoon. We'll give about a minute before we get started. Let you guys get settled. I imagine many of you are at your in your office or at your desk at school, so appreciate you joining us for this hour. All right. I know I worked in the school system for 10 years, so I know you all live and die by your calendar and your schedule. So we will get started now. Thank you for everyone joining us today as Collegewise talks about AI in college admissions. And a very special thank you to our partners at Xello for making this event happen and bringing you all here. I believe most of you are teachers, counselors, educators in the school system. And we're really happy to be here to help you. My name is Joe Korfmacher. I'm a college counselor based in New Jersey. I spent about 10 years as a school counselor and college counselor at St. Peter's Prep in Jersey City and director of college counseling at Xavier High School, Manhattan. Anyone here is in one of those two states. I have been with Collegewise now for 5 years, and while I still do some counseling, I lead our partnerships division as well. So we partner with corporations, organizations, nonprofits, and school districts, where we provide various services specifically for you all at schools, from free webinars for families on anything to do with college admissions, summer planning, test prep, the state of college admissions. To better support you and your families there. We also offer application accelerator programs, which are week-long programs, courses to help rising seniors through many of the important elements of the college application to give them a head start on that and help you as counselors and teachers come fall. We do professional development for school counselors who spend most of their time focusing on everything else but college counseling. Want to make sure that you're up to date with everything going on there. And many different options from buying counseling hours, group counseling, all of that. Our presenter today is Meredith Graham. She is a master Collegewise counselor and former Cornell University admissions officer and self-proclaimed STEM geek. Really lives and breathes this stuff and is going to give a great presentation on AI, how that's affecting admissions and how you can best be prepared, whatever your role is in the school helping your students. And real quick, for those unfamiliar with who we are, Collegewise, I know Xello. I'm assuming most of you partner with Xello, use it in your schools. So that's how you found out about us. We been working with students through the college admissions process for the last 25 years. So started in 1999. We started with one counselor working with a handful of students, and now we have over 150 counselors and tutors working with thousands of students each year. And as I mentioned before, we partner now with school districts as well. Two that come to mind right now are Palo Alto and Glendale out in California are two of our partners. We also partner with Johns Hopkins CTY program, helping their students, and we are official partners with the ACT as well. And our philosophy overall is to help equip students and families with advice and knowledge to make informed decisions. And that includes things like working on building a student's overall profile, identifying what colleges to apply to, strategies on those applications, and as well as test prep and curriculum tutoring. I will share a Google form in a second in the chat box. If you have any interest in learning more about how Collegewise may be able to support your school, again, we have both free options and not free options to utilize our services. You can fill out that form. We can set up a quick call with me to learn more about your needs and see if we can help. And I'll also share my email in there if you just want to email me directly. But with that, I will stop talking and let you hear from the great Meredith Graham. And again, this webinar will be recorded. So if you have to jump early, if you have to get to another class or some see a student, you will get the full recording sent to you in the next day or two. And thank you for your time. Appreciate all you do. And with that, I will pass it off to Meredith.
Thanks, Joe. Very excited to be here talking about AI and college admissions. As Joe said, I am a self-proclaimed STEM evangelist, complete with jazz hands most of the time. Um, so I really do get nerdy about this stuff. I get a kick out of it. I think it's fascinating. Um, Before I get into the content, I'll just tell you a little bit more about my background. As Joe said, I am a former admissions officer with Cornell University. I spent 7 years there as associate director of admissions for their College of Engineering. Before that, I spent about 5 years at Purdue, working primarily with engineering and science students and advising and recruiting. All told, I spent about 15 years on the college side before I joined Collegewise, and I'm just finishing my 11th year with Collegewise as a college counselor here. As Joe said, master college counselor. Um, and I'm currently based in Columbus, Ohio, where it is allergy season. So if I have to mute myself and cough briefly, I apologize. I also hope, Joe, if it gets too loud, please let me know. They're doing construction in our neighborhood, and I think you should not be able to hear it, but if it gets too loud, please let me know. And if I need to adjust my sound levels a little bit, and I'll see what I can do. Um, so we're going to get into, or I'm going to get into talking about AI in college admissions here. Um, I'm going to start by talking sort of big picture broadly about AI, and then get a little bit more into sort of the general mindset in higher ed, and then sort of looking ahead to what we're expecting over the next couple of years. And along the way, and especially at the end, I want to sort of bring it back around to ways that educators, particularly on the K-12 side, can either use or help your students use AI constructively, because there are some ways. Some of you are probably already familiar with that. Some of you may already be using some of the tools and resources and techniques that I'm going to talk about here. But for those of you who may not be familiar with it or have thought about it, hopefully you'll be able to take some tips away at this point as well. So to start with then, so how is higher ed, thinking about AI at this point? Um, and is it being used in admissions? And if so, how? Well, so to start with sort of big picture, how is AI, or how are colleges and universities thinking about AI? Um, most colleges and universities, higher ed in general, is cautious, which of course is a very nice way of saying that things move slowly in higher ed. So there hasn't, especially at first, there wasn't a ton of action being taken with AI. There was a lot of sort of wariness, a lot of sort of, oh, should we be using this? How are we going to use this? And some thoughtful approaches. When it comes to admissions, um, there are some sort of inroads beginning to happen in terms of AI being used in admissions. For a while, again, it wasn't really being used that extensively, but at this point, there are some colleges that are starting to use it, particularly around transcript screening. And a little bit of work and consideration with letters of recommendation. And so when I'm talking about transcript screening, for those of you who have never read college applications before, the first thing you're doing when you're reviewing an application is looking over the transcript. You're actually, reviewing it and trying to make sure that you see what classes the student's taken, how those classes fit into the context what of what's available at the student's school. I'm just trying to get a sense of what curriculum has the student chosen, and how does that sort of play in. And so that's it's a very important part of application review, particularly in holistic admissions, where you're trying to sort of, get an overall sense of all the different strengths and attributes of a candidate, of an applicant. But it's also a very time consuming piece of it. So, for colleges to be able to potentially use AI as sort of a transcript screening mechanism, to be able to sort of go in and sort of glean, okay, what classes has this student taken? What grades have they earned? And to present it in a way to an admissions officer that is usable, that's helpful, that's clear, that's accurate, is actually an incredible time savings for admissions readers, because then you can actually focus more on the content and the substance of the application and less on really digging into what classes has the student taken, just sort of the mechanics of what classes the student taken. Have they hit their 4 English classes, their 3 math classes, whatever number of college prep units you're hoping to see for the students. As far as general information goes at this point, the reports are that about 70% of colleges who say that they're using some form of AI for admissions are using them for transcripts, some sort of optical screening and sort of collating of information. Um, and a lot of them are also using them, as I said, for letters of recommendation. And when I say letters of recommendation, they're not making meaning out of it, but they're using it as sort of scanning for keywords, kind of like, with some of the job application software where they're looking for different keywords along the way. So those are sort of the main ways right now that college admissions offices are using AI for the time being. And a lot of that is just sort of trying to look out for, are there any red flags in the applications? Um, and if there aren't, then trying to continue to move forward. Now, beyond that, then what other kinds of ways is AI being used in application review? Well, there was a report in Inside Higher Ed a couple months ago that talked about a team of researchers from University of Colorado at Boulder and the University of Pennsylvania together, who had created an AI tool to help admissions officers read application essays, to sort of scan them. And they used a database of essays from a few years ago, between 2008 and 2009. So existing essays that were actually crafted by applicants. And there were more than essays from more than 300,000 applications that they used this and trained it on and tried to, review and get a sense of how well this worked. And, they fed them into the AI platforms and used admissions officers to train the AI. And they were searching for 7 different traits, things like, giving and generosity and curiosity and things like that. So trying to go beyond just looking for keywords like leadership. And what they found is there were some elements of it that worked quite well, but there were definitely some glitches in it. So, for example, it at this point, the AI could not discern between donating something that was a positive donation, like maybe blood donation, or donating money or goods or, food or what have you, or something that was maybe more nefarious. So in, one of the essays that they used, a student could say that they donated heroin to a shelter and it would still be flagged favorably because it was the word donation. Now, obviously, that's not a long-term solution. You can't really have an AI that's going to flag that as being a positive. So there's definitely a lot of work still to do before AI can really be a viable essay review tool in a way that doesn't have to have a human sort of really second reviewing them at this point. So it is being used. There's a lot of sort of experimentation that's going on. To the best of my knowledge at this point, though, there are no colleges that have turned over their entire application review process to AI. To the best of my knowledge, that's not happening anywhere, which is good. Um, and I don't think that's coming terribly quickly either. Is that in the future? At some colleges, perhaps. Um, One of the interesting details, I was talking with a former colleague of mine who now works at an ed tech company that runs one of the platforms that has some AI that's a part of it, some one of the application management softwares. And my colleague said that their company standard for successful AI sort of reads is 85% accuracy. That is considered highly successful. And that's fantastic. 85%. If I got an 85% on a test, I'd probably be pretty happy about it. But when we're talking about accuracy in a college application, I think most of us probably can agree that 85% accuracy on a transcript read or on translating what's in a letter of recommendation, gleaning the topics from a letter of recommendation, that's probably not quite successful enough at this point. For anyone to feel comfortable with that being the main, review technique. Um, so I want to talk now for a minute about how students can be using AI, sort of what's allowed and what isn't, as far as AI is concerned for college applications. So one of the big things when a student is filling out their application. And most students who are applying to college are going to use the Common App. It's the largest application platform. It's the one where the most students apply to the most colleges using the Common App. It's not the only one, but it is something where most of your students have some experience with it or will have experience with it. And you've probably submitted letters of recommendation through it, whether or not you know that you have. There's a box on the Common App that students have to check when they submit their applications that essentially says all of the work that I'm submitting here is my own work. So with every application a student submits, they are promising that the work that they are submitting is their own. And so that immediately is a pretty powerful incentive, for students to make sure that what they're submitting is generated by them and not by someone else, including AI. Um, and I'm going to come back to that thought here in a minute as well. What are colleges doing on this side? Well, there are some colleges that are using tools to sort of combat AI generated essays. Turnitin.com has been around for a long time at this point, and it is fairly accurate at this point. I think the last statistic I saw is that Turnitin.com had greater than 90% accuracy with identifying AI generated text. Um, so there are some colleges that are starting to sort of look to that, to those tools to try to help them identify AI generated essays. Um, One of the things that's interesting though is when you're reviewing applications, especially if you're reviewing a lot of essays. And I will say in my years at Cornell, I was reading between 120, first reading between 120 or 100 to 120 applications per week. That's a lot of essays because each application had between 2 and 3 essays, depending on the year, depending on the combination of essays that we were asking at that point. So you get a sense of what teenage writing looks like. And you do, once you get into the rhythm of it, once you know what you're looking for, you do have a sense of when a student has had help from someone. Historically, we've seen students where you can tell that maybe a parent or an adult has taken maybe too strong a hand in helping them write their essay. Where there are certain turns of phrase that adults are more prone to use in writing than teenagers are in writing. And so you would notice that in the applications, you would be able to see like, this doesn't really sound like maybe this is a student who wrote this. And then you sort of had to decide what to do about it. Did you follow up with the student? Did you follow up with the school? Or did you just sort of, decide, is this a risk we're willing to take with the student who may or may not have submitted something that was their own work? I was at our state conference. I'm on the executive board for the Ohio Association for College Admission Counseling. And our state conference was about a month ago. And our keynote speaker was talking about AI in college admissions and specifically when it came to essays. And one of the surveys that was presented as a part of the keynote was talking about, how admissions officers were feeling after having been through a full year of review of applications with potentially AI generated essays showing up. And most of the admissions officers felt like they had a pretty good sense of when it was written by a student or when it was written by AI. Um, and I think, you know, it's, it, there are some tells when you're looking at it. A lot of times the AI generated essays are, the writing may be pretty, but, a lot of times it can be bland. It's very impersonal. And that is one of the, one of the big keys with the essays along the way is making sure that they are more personal. Um, so one of the interesting things that happened this year was the college is working towards trying to figure out a way to embrace AI, in admissions, on the college classroom side, inside higher ed, and there was a piece in Forbes as well, talking about how students or how colleges are sort of trying to recognize that AI is here to stay. How can we use it as a tool rather than trying to ban it? There was early on, there were school districts that banned AI completely from the classroom and then reversed course. I think it was New York Public Schools. They banned all of Chat GPT from all devices in early 2023. And then by the, early summer of 2023 had reversed the ban. And then by fall of 2023 had announced that they were going to develop an AI policy lab to, help guide the district with smart policy around AI. And so I think even on the higher ed side, we're going to continue to see that on the high school side, but on the higher ed side in the college classroom, we're now seeing, professors who are, using AI and challenging students to critique AI written essays. And early on this year, there was a report that there was one college that had used a particular AI generated or AI generation prompt as one of their application essays. And when I went back to find it, I don't know if they changed the prompt or if what I had heard was rumor rather than fact. But late this spring, I did find out that the University of Michigan, for their letter sciences and arts, their College of Letter Sciences and Arts, their honors college application prompt directly like steered straight into AI in what I think is a really constructive way. And what they had students do for the application was to use an AI text generator to write an essay on the topic. How does the LSA honors program satisfy your desire for a particular kind of living learning community in your first 2 years of college? So they asked students specifically, give this to an AI, generate an essay, and then give us the essay that was that the AI generated, and then write your own essay and talk about whether or not that actually captured what you were looking for, and then sort of reflect how it matched or didn't match, and essentially critique the AI generated essay. And I think that's a really smart approach. There there's a lot of conversation among college counselors, both here at Collegewise as well as sort of within the broader field around how do we embrace AI. And this, I think, is one of the smart ways to do it because it's not going away. We all know that. How can we help students practice and understand what's the difference between, an AI generated essay and what's a really high quality essay, whether it's for your college application or for other essays. Within Collegewise this year, we did see, or this past year, we did see that there were some of our students who were trying to use AI to generate some of their essay drafts. And we have a very particular essay process that we use. And when I say that, we as counselors, when we work with our students, we have them do some sort of free writes, and then we talk with them about where their best stories are. Because the point of the application essays is for colleges to get to know the student. It's for them to get to know who is the person behind the application. It's not about students proving their worth. It's not even necessarily about proving that they can write well. That's something that's shifting a little bit, but it really is about students giving an admissions officer or an admissions office a sense of who they are outside of that application. And that's something that, great writing can do, great storytelling can do, identifying individual personal stories can do, but that's not something that AI can generate. because AI doesn't actually know the individual well. And so when we had students who submitted essays that seemed like they were AI generated or might potentially be, and again, we wanted to assume good intent. So, we tried to sort of talk with the student and say, hey, this doesn't, the phrase that I usually use with my students is, this doesn't sound like the you I've gotten to know. And that is one of the ways that I've, it sort of opens the door to a conversation without accusing them of doing something that maybe they shouldn't have. And then occasionally, we've had students who are like, oh yeah, maybe I leaned into the AI a little bit too much. Yeah, great. So let's have a conversation about how we can make this you. And so we've been refining sort of our thought process and approach around this. Um, and really, again, it's about the content. And what we're seeing is even places like Duke. There was an announcement about 2 months ago that Duke has decided for applications moving forward. So this wasn't in place for the current application cycle for students who are starting this fall, but for the next application cycle, it is in place. They made an announcement that they're going to be looking at the content of essays, but they're no longer going to assume that or provide a ranking or rating for the quality of writing in the application essay. Because as they said, they're sort of assuming that a lot of students are probably either using AI or maybe getting help from a professional where the professional is more ghostwriting it. So it's not so much about the student's authentic voice. And so they're still considering the essay, they're still considering the content of the essay, but for them, it's the examples, the content of the essay that matters. It's not about the quality of the writing. That's not so much what they're evaluating. And we had one of my Collegewise colleagues had a parent who'd reached out to him over the weekend, I think he said, and the parent was sort of asking about AI and admissions and essays and how, aren't essays just going to go by the wayside because of AI? And all indications at this point are no, essays are not going to go by the wayside. But one of my other colleagues phrased this as, he actually thinks that the shift away from are you good at writing to what can we learn about you actually makes essays in some ways more important and makes sort of the journey that we take our students on even more important, because again, it's digging into the who you are. What do you want an admissions officer to know about you? It's not about impressing them. It's not about sounding fancy. It's not about, throwing the thesaurus at your essay. It's about really helping them to get to know the person behind the application, and that is even more valuable at this point. Um, there's always a lot of fear with students though around that. I've been doing this. As I said, this is my 11th year with Collegewise. And I think a lot of students are worried that they don't have anything unique enough about them. They don't have anything that's interesting enough for them to be able to tell a story to an admissions officer. They don't feel like there's anything really valuable or worthwhile to tell an admissions officer, or they think that because their stories are maybe personal but not about being an Olympian or finding 14 patents or curing cancer, they feel like those aren't stories that are worth telling. The small personal stories aren't worth telling, when in reality, those stories are absolutely worth telling. But because of that fear, like sometimes we see students, I do think that's part of what drives the AI generation. It also sort of, I think, seizes students' brains up. But I used to see this on the college side as well, where I think students were just, too worried about, what they had to share. And so occasionally we would catch students who would plagiarize essays. I would say there was probably one or two students a year where we either knew flat out they were plagiarizing or suspected it. And so like when I'm talking with my students now at Collegewise, I do try to reinforce the idea that it's not worth it. It's not worth it to submit something that might be perceived as or might cross a line. And if they push back, I tell them a story of one of the most obvious plagiarists that we caught, that I caught personally. It was a student where when I was reading his essay, reading his application when I was at Cornell, the very first line of his essay was, "It's tough being a techie at Burlington Township High School." Now, the student did not attend Burlington Township High School and had never attended a high school named Burlington Township High School. And so I thought, something's not adding up here. And the essay itself was fantastic. It was a great story, but it didn't really match with any of sort of the personal details of this student. The name of the high school was off, was talking about an extracurricular that the student had only sort of maybe tangentially been involved with, opposed to like talking about this deep involvement in this essay. So I talked with my director, and we sort of said, yeah, let's reach out to the school. And so we actually reached out to the school counselor. And the school counselor, sang the student's praises and talked about how wonderful this student was. And then we sort of said, well, we're a little bit concerned about, this essay, and here, here's a little bit about what we're seeing. Do you have an explanation for it? And the counselor, was a great student advocate in the moment and said, I'm sure there's an explanation. I'm sure. And so said, actually, the student's at lunch right now. Let me go get him and we'll bring him in and we'll talk about it. We're like, fantastic. We would love to do that. So the counselor went and got the student and brought the student back into the office and put him on speakerphone with us. And so we're sitting there, asking the student questions, and the counselor's asking the student questions too, and sort of saying, hey, they have a question about your essay. They're saying it starts with, it's tough being a techie at Burlington Township High School. Did you write this essay? And the student said, oh yeah, well, I was imagining what it would be like to be a student at Burlington Township High School. And so the counselor sort of kept asking questions and we're listening, and it became pretty clear that the student had not, in fact, written the essay as we'd suspected. And after probably about 3 or 4 minutes of the counselor asking questions, there was sort of this pause, and we heard the counselor say, does this give you the information you need? And we said, yes, it does. Thank you so much. And the counselor said, yep, thank you. And hung up, because it was pretty clear at the counselor as well that the student had plagiarized. And so for us, that was an easy no. There was no way we were going to say yes to that student, which was unfortunate because the student was well qualified and we were leaning towards a yes otherwise. But that was one, there was no way. So we said no. So when we come back to, is it worth it? I think not. And that's what I reinforce with my students. You're better off writing an essay that you may feel is not as polished or as shiny, than you are, trying to use ChatGPT or another AI to write some sort of flowery, beautiful, impersonal essay that doesn't actually help along the way. So I want to talk a little bit about looking forward now. What kinds of things do we expect are going to be happening? Well, as I mentioned earlier, we do expect that schools, K-12 schools, are going to continue to find ways to embrace AI in the school. It's here. It's not going anywhere. So how can we in education across, K through 16, how can we embrace it in a way that is constructive for the student and for the school? And so I know I gave the example of the New York City schools, creating their AI policy lab. And I think those kinds of initiatives are going to be increasing as schools and areas, different regions are trying to figure out how do we embrace this technology and use it constructively within our school, and also help our students know how to use it ethically. What does that look like? So I think that, within schools, I think teachers have started to and are going to continue to find ways to use AI to teach students to write better. Like the example that I gave about the University of Michigan, their honors prompt. I think that, teachers are going to continue to lean into that, say, okay, like, generate a prompt using AI and then critique it, explain how you can write a better essay, how you as a human can write a better essay, and then show me a better essay, show me how you can incorporate more personal detail, how can you refine it so that it improves. One way that teachers and students can use AI is sort of with idea generation. Like there's nothing wrong with using AI to sort of generate some ideas, to sort of kick ideas around about the kinds of things that a student might want to include in an application essay, or what kinds of things they might want to talk about in an essay. There's nothing wrong with that. And even for colleges that have started to put together AI policies, which it's starting to pick up speed. I think that we're going to see more of that this year. Colleges specifically saying, here's how you can use AI, here's how you should use AI in your application, and here's how you cannot use AI. I think Georgia Tech was the first out of the gate with an AI policy for applications and for applicants. And then Caltech followed pretty shortly after that. And now there are other colleges that are starting to put those together. And so as long as the student sort of follows sort of the general those general guidelines, it's fine for them to use it as an assist. It's just that the final product needs to be what they have done, needs to be their own writing. So, teachers, helping students use it to generate some ideas and figure out how to improve your own writing, absolutely lean into that. Um, as far as counselors are concerned, I think one of the things we're going to start to see, and word on the street is some counselors were already using AI to help them with letters of recommendation. I think everyone, or at least everyone who's on sort of who's in this realm understands how hard it is to write letters of recommendation. I'm very sure that every single person who is watching this webinar has written letters of recommendation at some point, whether it's teacher recommendations or counselor recommendations. It is an important thing and it is a time suck. It takes so much time to write great letters. We all know that. So if counselors and teachers can use AI to help sort of sort of thread together ideas and create some sort of a foundation for letters of recommendation so that you can again free up your time to be doing the work of teaching, the work of counseling, like the more important critical pieces of the interactions, then yay, that's a really fantastic use of it. One thing that I will say when it comes to letters of recommendation, one of the trends that sort of increasing that I'm seeing is counselors using instead of doing like a full like 1 to 2 page flowery narrative letter of recommendation, which I understand some schools have policies around that. But counselors who are doing like basically like an executive summary of a letter of recommendation or like a bullet point list of high points of the letter of recommendation and then having a little bit more content at the bottom. I think AI is really going to lend itself to that. And I would encourage counselors to sort of lean into that as well. Playing around with it, not necessarily writing it for you, but sort of again, playing around with it a little bit to make your lives easier, especially if you have, the massive caseloads that most school counselors have. I think that's definitely one of the things that you can, one of the ways to use AI that's constructive. Um, One of the other things we think we're gonna start to see a year or two from now, is, within K through 12 and within K through 16, really a better understanding, and more nuance around how to utilize AI, in ways that are constructive, better sort of critical thinking around the quality of information that AI generates, how the AI is trained. So, sort of understanding, can I trust the responses I'm getting from this AI? If it's trained on a very specific subset and isn't just sort of, free ranging the internet to pull things in, there's certain elements that may be more trustworthy than others. But having, again, an understanding, a critical understanding of how the AI works, of the algorithms, of how things are being put together. And how to like what are best practices around using AI to improve education. I actually just saw a piece earlier today that was talking about the and I'm not going to get the statistic right, but was talking about AI actually grading essays in a K-12 setting, and talked about how there was a pretty high percentage of accuracy of grading essays with this particular AI with a particular rubric for whatever class essay it was, and it was within, I think as they said, it was within 1 percentage point difference of what the teachers who are evaluating were grading it as. So that's something where, I mean, again, that's a little nerve-wracking in some ways, but again, if it can free up your time a little bit more to do the instruction that, the important pieces of that, that could be a really interesting usage. We also think that there's going to be, more chance for more personalized education and improvement of equity, because of the potential for accessing information through high quality AI. There's a group that's partnering with NACAC, the National Association for College Admission Counseling, that's creating essentially they're piloting like an AI assist, like a college counseling assist, which is really fascinating. Again, it's a little nerve-wracking, a little scary, but if that's something where students can have access to it, if they, if there's at a school where the ratio of counseling to students is really prohibitive, that isn't a way that students could potentially get fantastic information. Again, assuming all the pieces of literacy and information literacy and everything along the way as well. We also think that colleges are, I don't think essays are going to go away. We don't think essays are going to go away. But we do think that colleges are going to continue to sort of shift how they're considering the essays. So kind of following what Duke said and sort of saying, we're not going to worry about the quality of a student's writing as much. Like we're not going to evaluate them on the quality of their writing because we're going to assume that there's probably some sort of an assist in it. We want to hear more about the content that they're sharing. But we also think that there's a potential for colleges to do a couple of different things. One of them is to move towards more sort of video introductions. So again, ways for students to possibly share more about themselves on video. So sort of replacing the old school interview. And there are a couple of other like organizations and companies that have sort of popped up with like standardized video introductions and interviews that some colleges have started to use. Duke is actually one of the places that started to use something that's called a Glimpse, which is a particular video option that's put together by a company where a student can, record themselves, and then Duke could say like, hey, I want to see this student talking about themselves to get a sense of who they are. We think that more colleges are going to offer that kind of thing as an option, whether it's through Glimpse or whether it's through something like, portal like Brown has done the last couple of years. University of Chicago has offered it as well for a student to upload a video that's up to 2 minutes of them talking about themselves, introducing themselves, and sort of saying, hey, here's who I am and what I'm about. And we do think that colleges are going to continue to do that as a different way for students to show a little bit about who they are. We don't think that's going to be required because, again, equity. But we do think that more colleges are going to offer that as the opportunity for students if they want to. We also think that some colleges are going to maybe consider moving towards having timed essay samples, timed writing samples. There are, there are some examples of that that have started to happen. It's not real prevalent. I don't expect that that's going to take over completely with essays, but we do think that there are going to be some cases where there'll be colleges that might lean into that as well. We also think that colleges are going to continue to use AI to sort of pull together, collate transcripts, scan them, screen them, and again, free up admissions officers to do more actual holistic reading. We do think that that's really going to continue to happen, particularly at well-resourced universities. The challenge, of course, is universities that are under-resourced are going to continue to have burnout issues with their admissions readers, and probably going to continue to have challenges with hiring and retention for admissions officers, because, again, it's the platforms aren't cheap. And so, to really develop them properly. So we do think that that's going to continue, at least over the next couple of years. One other thing that I think is interesting, that we think is probably going to happen in the next couple of years, we do think that most AI will reach a point over the next few years where it is accurate enough and consistently accurate enough for students to be able to use it as a viable resource for list building. Trying to figure out, what kinds of places should they apply for whoever that individual student is. There's still some sort of hit or miss in terms of content and accuracy in there. So a student who uses it to generate a list may get some things that would be fantastic at this point, but they might also get some things that would be completely off from things that would be a good fit for them. But over the next probably 2 to 3 years, we do think that it's going to evolve enough where students can probably generate a realistic, reasonable list using AI. Probably like when we're doing sort of a longer term forecast at this point, if we're thinking like 5 years from now, 5 or so years from now, The things that we think are most likely are less selective universities, regional public universities, maybe more modestly selective liberal arts colleges. We think, particularly the publics, they're likely to return to a more sort of a cookbook for admissions. And when I say that, I mean less holistic admissions and much more like, do you have the right number of college prep units? Do you have the right grades in those classes? And for places that are going to allow, or sorry, places that will require standardized test scores, or for students who feel like their tests are strong representations, if they hit a certain testing threshold, they'll be, automatically admitted. We do think that that kind of thing is going to increase again over the next probably 5 years or so. Um, and we think probably within about 5 years, the vast majority of colleges will have an actual policy around what is and is not acceptable for AI as far as their college's applications are concerned. We think that, colleges are going to assume that students are accessing AI and using it in some capacity or another. And so then they're going to be outlining, here's, what is okay, here's what's not okay for our campus. And I actually think that the majority of responses, I think the policies are going to be pretty well aligned. So I don't think we're going to see a lot of like, well, this university says it's okay for me to do these 5 things, but these other universities say that's not okay. So do I have to do 2 different essays? I think most of them are going to come to maybe not full consensus, but I think they're going to land in enough of a zone around policies where, if students, sort of approach it in a particular way using AI, that they'll probably be okay. And again, can sort of develop that skill because they're going to need that skill once they're in the workplace. Because again, AI is not going anywhere. So I think my best advice for teachers and school counselors at this point is really sort of thinking about, how can you use AI yourself and how can you teach your students to use it in a way that's ethical? And so I think from where I sit, I think the best ways to do that in this moment is if you haven't already, try and use sort of that Michigan model around, okay, generate AI, do an AI generated essay and then critique it, explain, how you could do better, how you should do better, like what would be better writing, including more details, the personal details that would be in there, figuring out accuracy, figuring out voice, because that's the other thing is the voice in AI is, tends to be a little generic in general. So that's one of the suggestions for sort of playing around. So getting familiar with it, understanding how to generate it and how to critique it and understand how to improve their own writing from it. And then as teachers and counselors, play around a little bit with using AI for as an assist for letters of recommendation. Don't let it do all the work for you, but because again, can't really tell your students not to do it if you're, but figuring out how you can use it to get an assist for yourself to save your sanity and to still support your students as they're heading off in their application journey. So, and with that, I'm going to invite Joe to come back on screen and see where we are with
Thank
things.
you so much. Wow, that was great. Yeah, I don't know, you obviously weren't looking at the chat, but I had trouble with sharing a Google Doc or form, and so I have deemed myself not a STEM geek, but we figured it out. We got some people that respond us. That's great. Does not look like any questions. So again, really appreciate all of you joining us. If you do have a question, you can post it now. But this will be sent out as a recording to your email. So feel free to share it with any of your colleagues at your school, other schools, and be on the lookout for future webinars for educators from Collegewise in the months to come. And once again, just really want to thank Xello for helping us out and putting this together. They've been a great partner the last couple of years, and happy that all of you are using Xello. With that, we will let you go, give you back some 10 minutes of your hour. Have a great rest of the week. Summer is almost here, so hang in there. And thanks for all that you do. Bye, guys.